If you had told me that one night at the family reunion would change everything I thought I knew about my family and myself, I wouldn't have believed you. But it did. And it all started when my dad said the one thing that shattered me completely, yet somehow set me free.
I'm 31 now, and I can still feel the weight of those words crushing down on my chest like a physical thing. But let me take you back to the beginning. Because to understand that night, the night everything fell apart, and somehow came together, you need to understand what it was like growing up as Richard Blackwood's daughter, or what I thought was his daughter.
My father built an empire from nothing. Blackwood Industries started in a cramped garage and became a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate spanning real estate, tech, and manufacturing. The man who could negotiate billion-dollar deals with world leaders, who graced the covers of Fortune and Forbes, who commanded respect from everyone he met. That same man looked at me like I was a mistake he couldn't quite figure out how to fix. Growing up in the Blackwood mansion was like living in a museum where you were simultaneously the most valuable artifact and the thing everyone pretended not to notice was broken. Every morning I'd wake up in my pristine white bedroom with its imported Italian marble and hand-painted ceiling, and I'd feel this hollow ache in my chest that no amount of luxury could fill. The house was always cold, not because of the temperature, God knows we could afford heating, but because warmth was a commodity my father never learned to invest in. My older brother Marcus was the golden child from the moment he took his first breath. 6'2" Harvard Business School, sharp jawline that could cut glass, and a natural charisma that made everyone in the room gravitate toward him. He walked into boardrooms at 25 and commanded respect that took other men decades to earn. Marcus was everything my father wanted in a son. Ruthless when necessary, charming when it served him, and completely devoted to the family business. When Marcus spoke, Dad listened. When Marcus suggested a new acquisition or strategy, Dad implemented it. Marcus was the heir apparent, the chosen one, the living embodiment of everything the Blackwood name represented. Then there was Emma, my younger sister by 3 years. Emma was the peacekeeper, the diplomat, the one who could smooth over any family tension with her gentle smile and perfectly timed interventions. She had this gift for reading a room and knowing exactly what to say to diffuse any situation. Where Marcus commanded respect through power, Emma earned love through kindness. She was studying to be a child psychologist, dedicating her life to helping kids who'd been through trauma. Even Dad, in his rare moments of softness, would look at Emma with something approaching genuine affection. She was the family's conscience, the reminder that Blackwoods could be more than just corporate predators. And then there was me, Sophia Blackwood, the puzzle piece that never quite fit. I spent my entire childhood trying to decode the mystery of my father's disappointment. I graduated valedictorian from prep school, earned a full scholarship to Yale despite our family's wealth, double majored in business and international relations, graduated summa cum laude, and landed a position at one of New York's most prestigious consulting firms before I turned 25. I spoke 4 languages fluently, could navigate complex financial markets, and had closed deals worth millions of dollars. On paper, I was everything a successful businessman could want in a daughter. But it was never enough. Never. I remember the night I brought home my acceptance letter to Yale. I was 17, vibrating with excitement, clutching that envelope like it was made of gold. I burst into Dad's study where he was reviewing quarterly reports, and I practically threw the letter at him.
Dad, I got in. Full scholarship. They said my essay on emerging markets was the best they'd seen in years.
He glanced at the letter for maybe 3 seconds, handed it back to me, and said, "Good. Don't let it go to your head." Marcus got into Harvard without needing a scholarship. Then he went back to his reports like I'd just told him about the weather. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, feeling something inside me crack. Not break. Not yet, but crack, like ice starting to split before it shatters completely. The pattern continued through college, through my early career, through every achievement I thought might finally earn me the recognition I desperately craved. When I made my first $1 million deal at 26, Dad's response was, "Marcus closed 3 deals worth twice that much last month." When I bought him a vintage Rolex for his 60th birthday, something I'd been saving for months to afford, he examined it briefly and said, "Interesting choice. Emma gave me something similar last year, but hers had more sentimental value." The thing about emotional starvation is that it makes you do desperate things. I found myself staying late at the office. Not because I had work to do, but because going home meant facing the reality that I lived alone in an apartment that felt more like a holding cell than a home. I started saying yes to every social invitation, every work trip, every opportunity to be anywhere but sitting with my own thoughts. I dated men who reminded me of my father. Powerful, distant, impossible to please, and I convinced myself that their eventual rejection was just proof that I needed to try harder. But the real breaking point came 2 years ago when I made a decision that I thought would finally get his attention. I liquidated almost everything I owned. My investment portfolio, my savings, even sold some jewelry my grandmother had left me, and I bought him something I knew he'd been wanting for years, a 1967 Shelby Cobra, pristine condition, worth more than most people's houses. It was the same model he'd admired in magazines when I was a kid, the same car he'd pointed out at car shows, with a rare gleam of genuine desire in his eyes. I had it delivered to his office on a Tuesday afternoon, wrapped with a bow and everything. I even wrote him a letter explaining why I'd chosen it, sharing memories of us looking at cars together when I was little, telling him how much I loved him and wanted him to be proud of me. His assistant called me 3 hours later. "Miss Blackwood? Your father asked me to thank you for the car. He's had it appraised and will be donating it to the company charity auction next month. He felt it was too extravagant a gift and that the tax write-off would be more beneficial to the family business." I hung up the phone and cried for the first time in years. Not the pretty, delicate tears you see in movies, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that left me hollow and raw. That night, I sat in my empty apartment and started to wonder if there was something fundamentally wrong with me, something broken at my core that made me unlovable to the one person whose love I wanted most. Which brings me to the reunion. The Blackwood family reunion happens every 3 years at the family estate in the Hamptons, 30 acres of manicured perfection overlooking the Atlantic. It's not really a reunion in the traditional sense. It's more like a corporate summit disguised as a family gathering. Distant relatives fly in from around the world, business associates mingle with blood relations, and everyone spends the weekend networking while pretending to care about each other's children and careers. This year felt different from the moment I walked through the front doors. The house was more crowded than usual. Dad had invited some potential investors, a few politicians he was courting, and what seemed like half the New York social elite. The whole event felt less like a family gathering and more like a performance designed to showcase the Blackwood dynasty to people who mattered. I wore a navy blue dress that I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Elegant but not flashy, professional but not cold. I'd spent an hour on my makeup and hair, wanting to look perfect, wanting to blend in, wanting to finally be someone my father could look at with pride, instead of that familiar expression of mild disappointment. Marcus arrived with his fiancée, a stunning blonde named Victoria, who came from old money and carried herself like she'd been born knowing she was better than everyone else. They glided through the crowd like royalty, Marcus in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, shaking hands and making deals while Victoria charmed potential business partners with her finishing school smile. Emma came with her boyfriend David, a soft-spoken pediatric resident who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, but who endured the weekend because he loved my sister. Emma had chosen a simple green dress that made her look like a forest sprite, and she spent most of the evening making sure the older relatives felt included and helping the catering staff when she thought no one was looking. And then there was me, floating through the crowd like a ghost at my own family's party, making polite conversation with people who knew my name but clearly couldn't place exactly who I was or why I mattered. I found myself gravitating toward the bar more often than usual, not because I was drunk, I've never been much of a drinker, but because it gave me something to do with my hands and a reason to step away from conversations that felt like performance art. The evening had been going as expected, uncomfortable but manageable. Until about 10 o'clock when Dad decided to make his annual speech. This was a tradition at every reunion. Richard Blackwood would call for everyone's attention and deliver what was essentially a state of the family address, highlighting achievements, announcing new ventures, and generally reminding everyone why the Blackwood name commanded respect. I was standing near the back of the crowd when he tapped his champagne glass with a silver knife, and the room fell silent with the kind of immediate attention that only real power can command. He looked distinguished as always in his perfectly fitted tuxedo, his silver hair slicked back, his presence commanding the room without effort. "Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends," he began, his voice carrying that smooth authority that had convinced world leaders to sign billion-dollar agreements. "Another 3 years have passed, and once again, we gather to celebrate not just our family bonds, but the continued success and growth of everything the Blackwood name represents." The usual applause followed, polite but genuine. I found myself clapping along even though something in my chest was already starting to tighten with a familiar anxiety. This has been a particularly remarkable period for our family, Dad continued, his eyes scanning the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who'd given thousands of speeches. Marcus has successfully launched our expansion into the Asian markets, with profits exceeding our most optimistic projections by nearly 40%. His engagement to Victoria represents not just a personal milestone, but a strategic alliance between two of America's most respected families. More applause. Marcus raised his glass with a modest smile that I knew was completely calculated. Victoria beamed beside him, playing her part perfectly. Emma has been accepted into the doctoral program at Columbia, where she'll be researching innovative therapies for children who've experienced trauma. Her work has already caught the attention of several major foundations, and I have no doubt she'll make significant contributions to our field while continuing to embody the compassion and integrity that define our family values. Emma blushed prettily and waved off the attention in that self-deprecating way that made everyone love her more. David squeezed her hand, looking proud and slightly overwhelmed by the formal recognition. And then Dad's eyes found me in the crowd, and for just a moment I felt that familiar flutter of hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe he'd finally acknowledge something I'd accomplished. Maybe he'd find something about me worth celebrating in front of all these people who mattered to him. I'm proud of all my children, he said, and my heart started to lift despite every instinct telling me not to hope. I'm proud of their achievements, their dedication, their commitment to excellence. He paused, and in that pause, I felt the whole room holding its breath with me. All of them except the loser. The words hit me like a physical blow, not a slap. Slaps are quick and sharp and over. This was like being hit by a truck, a crushing weight that seemed to cave in my chest and steal all the air from my lungs. The room went completely silent. That terrible kind of silence that follows when someone says something so shocking that everyone needs a moment to process whether they actually heard it correctly. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Some confused, some pitying, some hungry for drama. The blood rushed to my face so fast I thought I might faint, and my hands started shaking so violently that I had to set down my champagne glass before I dropped it. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that Dad wasn't done. Some people are born to lead, born to achieve, born to carry on a legacy with honor and distinction, he continued, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. And some people are born to remind us why excellence matters, why standards exist, why we can't afford to lower our expectations just because someone shares our DNA. I stood there frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to process what was happening. This wasn't just disappointment or criticism. This was a public execution, a deliberate and calculated humiliation in front of everyone who mattered in our world. I could feel tears building behind my eyes, and I knew that if I didn't get out of there immediately, I was going to break down completely in front of all these people. So I ran. I pushed through the crowd, ignoring the whispers and stares, ignoring Emma calling my name, ignoring everything except the desperate need to get somewhere, anywhere, where I could fall apart in private. I made it to the beach before the sobs started, great heaving gasps that felt like they were being torn from somewhere deep inside my chest. I collapsed onto the sand in my expensive dress and cried harder than I had since I was a child. All those years of trying, all those achievements and sacrifices and desperate attempts to earn even a moment of his approval, and this was what I got. Public humiliation. A deliberate, calculated reminder that I would never, ever be enough. But sometimes the worst moments of your life are also the ones that finally wake you up. I was sitting there on the beach, mascara probably streaked down my face, when I heard footsteps in the sand behind me. I assumed it was Emma coming to comfort me, or maybe Marcus coming to do damage control for the family reputation. But when I turned around, I saw a man I didn't recognize. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a simple black suit that looked expensive but understated. "Sophia Blackwood," he said, and there was something in his voice that made me suddenly alert despite my emotional state. "Who's asking?" I managed to say, wiping at my face with the back of my hand. "My name is James Morrison. I'm a private investigator, and I have some information about your family that I think you need to hear." Under normal circumstances, I would have told him to leave me alone. Would have assumed he was some tabloid reporter looking for dirt on the Blackwood family. But nothing about this night had been normal, and something in his expression, serious, almost gentle, made me stay put. "What kind of information?" I asked. He sat down on the sand beside me, careful not to get too close. Respectful of my space in a way that felt genuine. The kind that explains why your father has always treated you differently than your siblings. The kind that might help you understand why you've never felt like you belonged in that house. My heart started pounding, but not from fear, from something else. Something that felt almost like anticipation. What are you talking about? James reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. 3 months ago, I was hired by someone to investigate certain irregularities in your father's business dealings from the early 90s. What I found wasn't just financial impropriety, it was a web of secrets that your father has been keeping for over 30 years. He handed me the envelope, and I stared at it like it might explode. What does this have to do with me? Everything, he said simply. Sophia, you're not Richard Blackwood's biological daughter. The world tilted sideways. I actually felt dizzy, like the ground beneath me had shifted and I couldn't find my balance. That's impossible. I look just like... You look like your mother. Margaret was your biological mother. That part is true. But your biological father was someone else entirely. Someone your father considered his greatest business rival and personal enemy. I opened the envelope with trembling hands and found myself staring at documents that seemed to swim on the page. DNA test results, hospital records, private investigator reports dating back decades. But the one that made my blood run cold was a letter in my mother's handwriting, dated just a few months before she died when I was 12. Richard, I can't take this secret to my grave. Sophia deserves to know the truth about who she is, and you deserve to finally be free of the reminder of my betrayal. Her father is Thomas Chen, and no matter how much you've tried to punish her for my mistakes, she is innocent of everything except being born. Please, for once in your life, choose love over revenge. Thomas Chen. I knew that name. Every person in our industry knew that name. Thomas Chen had been Dad's biggest competitor in the early days of Blackwood Industries, the brilliant innovator who'd almost beaten Dad to several major contracts before disappearing from the business world in the mid-1990s under mysterious circumstances. My mother had an affair, I whispered, the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. A brief relationship during a separation from your father that lasted about 6 months in 1992, James confirmed. When your parents reconciled, your mother was already pregnant, but she told your father you were his. The truth only came out years later, after you were born and your father began to suspect. He had a private DNA test done when you were 2 years old. So he's known for almost 30 years that I'm not his biological daughter, and he, what? Decided to keep me around as punishment? As a constant reminder of my mother's betrayal? That's what it looks like. According to my sources, your father saw 2 options when he learned the truth: expose the affair and destroy his marriage and public image, or keep the secret and exact a different kind of revenge. He chose to keep you close, but make sure you never forgot that you didn't really belong. I thought about every cold dismissal, every backhanded compliment, every moment of withheld affection over the past 30 years, and suddenly it all made sense. I wasn't his daughter disappointing him. I was the living embodiment of his wife's betrayal, a daily reminder of the one time someone had gotten the better of Richard Blackwood. Where is he? I asked. Thomas Chen, my real father. James's expression grew sad. He died 5 years ago. Cancer. But Sophia, he never knew about you. Your mother never told him, and your father made sure he never found out. Thomas Chen lived his whole life not knowing he had a daughter. The grief hit me like a physical blow. Not just grief for the father I'd lost without ever knowing him, but grief for all the years we'd lost, all the love that might have been possible if the truth had come out sooner. I sat there on the beach, holding documents that rewrote my entire understanding of my life, and I felt something inside me break open. Not the kind of breaking that destroys you, but the kind that lets the light in. There's more, James said gently. Thomas Chen wasn't just successful, he was known in the industry for his integrity, his philanthropy, his dedication to his employees. Everything your father claims to value but has never actually embodied. And Sophia, he had a son. You have a half-brother. A brother? My voice came out as barely a whisper. James nodded and pulled out a photograph. David Chen? He's 35, runs a nonprofit organization that provides educational resources to underprivileged communities. He's been looking for information about his father's past for years, trying to understand why Thomas left the business world so suddenly. If you want to meet him? I stared at the photograph of a man who had my eyes, my smile, my stubborn jawline that had never looked quite right on a Blackwood face. Here was a brother I'd never known, a family connection that might actually be based on love instead of obligation and disappointment. How do I know you're telling the truth? I asked, even though every instinct I had was screaming that this was real, that this finally explained everything. Because I was hired by David Chen, James said simply. He's been trying to understand his father's history for years, and his investigation led him to your family. He knows about you, Sophia. He's known for months, and he's been trying to figure out how to approach you without destroying your life. When he saw the reunion announcement in the society pages, he asked me to come here tonight and try to talk to you privately.
He's here? Now?
He's waiting in the parking lot, hoping you'll agree to meet him. But only if you want to. He understands that this is a lot to process, and he doesn't want to pressure you into anything. I looked back toward the house where my fake family was probably still mingling and networking, where my father was probably already moving on from his public humiliation of me like it was just another business transaction. Then I looked at the photograph of a man who shared my DNA and possibly my capacity for love, who'd spent years trying to find the family connections that had been stolen from him. The choice felt surprisingly easy. I want to meet him, I said. The walk back to the parking lot felt like walking into a different life. With every step, I was leaving behind 30 years of trying to be someone I was never meant to be, 30 years of chasing approval from a man who was biologically and emotionally incapable of giving it to me. David Chen was leaning against a silver Toyota Prius, not because he couldn't afford something more expensive, but because he'd chosen practicality over status. When he saw me approaching, he straightened up and I could see him trying to read my expression, probably wondering if I was about to scream at him or call security. Instead, I walked right up to him and said, "You have our father's eyes." His face broke into a smile that was like looking in a mirror, and suddenly I was hugging a stranger who felt more like family than anyone I'd grown up with. "I'm sorry," he said when we finally pulled apart. "I'm sorry for approaching you like this. I'm sorry for turning your life upside down. I'm sorry that you had to find out this way." "Don't be sorry," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "This is the first time in my life that anything has made sense." We talked for 3 hours in that parking lot. David told me about growing up with a father who was brilliant and kind, but haunted by something he wouldn't talk about. How Thomas had left the business world suddenly and completely, focusing instead on smaller ventures that let him help people directly. He told me about their modest but happy life, about a man who valued integrity over profit, and who'd taught his son that success meant making the world a little better than you found it. In return, I told him about growing up in luxury but emotional poverty, about a father who'd given me everything except the one thing I needed most. I told him about years of trying to earn love that was never available, about achievements that felt hollow because they were never enough. "He punished you for something that wasn't even your fault," David said, anger flashing in his eyes. "You were just a child." "I wasn't his child," I said. And for the first time, I felt relief instead of pain when I said those words. That's what I'm finally starting to understand. I spent 30 years trying to be his daughter when I should have been trying to be Thomas Chen's daughter instead. "Our father would have loved you," David said with quiet certainty. "He would have been so proud of everything you've accomplished, so proud of who you are. Not because of your degrees or your career or your achievements, just because you were his." I started crying again. But these were different tears. These were tears of grief for what I'd lost, but also tears of relief for what I'd found. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere, like I was part of something real, instead of just performing a role I'd never auditioned for. "What happens now?" I asked. David smiled. "Whatever you want to happen. You can take time to process all of this. You can meet me for coffee next week and get to know each other slowly. You can pretend this conversation never happened if you decide it's too complicated. Or you can come home with me tonight and meet the family that's been waiting 30 years to know they had a sister." The family that's been waiting to know they had a sister? Not the family that's been disappointed by the sister they got stuck with, but the family that's been incomplete without knowing about me. I thought about going back to that house, about facing my father's cold satisfaction, and having finally said what he'd been thinking for decades. I thought about Marcus and Emma, who loved me but would never truly understand what it felt like to be the outsider in their perfect family dynamic. I thought about returning to my empty apartment and my high-pressure job and my carefully constructed life that had never felt like it actually belonged to me. Then I thought about the possibility of belonging somewhere real, of being loved not despite who I was, but because of who I was. "I need to go back and get my things," I said. "Are you sure?" David asked. Once you walk back in there, there's no taking back whatever you decide to say. I looked toward the house one more time, seeing it not as the castle I'd spent my life trying to storm, but as the prison I'd finally found the key to escape. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Walking back into that house felt like walking into a movie of my old life. The party was still going strong, though I noticed people glancing at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity when they thought I wasn't looking. Dad was holding court near the fireplace, probably telling some story about crushing a competitor or closing an impossible deal, surrounded by admirers who hung on his every word. Emma found me first. Sophie, oh my God, are you okay? I've been looking everywhere for you. Dad said you just needed some air, but I'm fine, I said. And I meant it for the first time in years. Actually, I'm better than fine, but I need to go up to my room and pack. Pack? What do you mean, pack? I mean, I'm leaving. Tonight, for good. Emma's face went white. Sophie, you can't just leave because he said something thoughtless. You know how he gets at these things. He doesn't always think before he speaks. Emma. I took her hands in mine, looking at this sister who'd spent her life trying to smooth over everyone else's rough edges. He called me a loser in front of 100 people. He said I was a reminder of why excellence matters. That wasn't thoughtless, that was deliberate and cruel, and it was years in the making. But where will you go? What about your job, your apartment, your life? I'm going to go find my real life. The one I should have been living all along. I could see her trying to process this, trying to find the words that would fix everything like she'd been doing our whole lives. But for once, I didn't need her to fix anything for me. I love you, Emma. You're the best part of this family, and I hope we can still have a relationship outside of all this. But I can't keep pretending that I belong here when it's clear that I never did. I found Marcus next, standing on the terrace with Victoria and a group of business associates, probably discussing some deal or acquisition. When he saw me approaching, he excused himself from the group with that smooth politician's smile. There you are. Listen, about what Dad said earlier. He's been drinking, and you know how he gets when he's trying to impress investors. He didn't mean anything by it. Yes, he did, I said simply, and you know it. Marcus looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Sophie, come on. Your family. This is where you belong. No, Marcus, this is where you belong. This has always been your world, your destiny, your inheritance. I've just been a guest here, and not a particularly welcome one. That's not true. It is true, and we both know it. You've watched him dismiss me and diminish me for years, and you've never said a word because it didn't affect you. And that's fine. I'm not asking you to have fought my battles for me, but don't stand here now and pretend that what happened tonight was an aberration. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him trying to decide whether to keep up the pretense or acknowledge what we both knew. Finally, he sighed. What do you want me to say, Sophie? That Dad's never treated you the way he treats Emma and me? Okay, fine. But that doesn't mean you should throw away everything you've built here. I'm not throwing it away. I'm choosing something better. I left him standing there looking confused and went upstairs to my childhood bedroom. The space felt foreign now, like a museum exhibit about someone else's life. I packed quickly, taking only the things that actually mattered to me. Some photos, a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother, some books I'd loved as a child. As I was closing my suitcase, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I knew without looking that it was my father. His presence had a weight to it that I'd learned to recognize before I could even walk. Running away again? He said from the doorway. I turned to face him, this man who'd shaped every insecurity and driving ambition I'd ever had, and for the first time in my life I felt nothing. Not anger, not hurt, not even disappointment. Just nothing. I'm not running away, I said calmly. I'm choosing to leave. Because I told the truth about what you are? Because you finally told the truth about what you are. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise. Maybe that I wasn't crumbling or begging for his forgiveness like I had so many times before. You think you can just walk away from this family? From everything I've given you? The education, the opportunities, the connections that got you where you are? I think I can walk away from a man who spent 30 years punishing a child for her mother's choices. I think I can walk away from someone who kept me close just so he could remind me every day that I didn't belong. His face went very still. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. You've known since I was 2 years old that Thomas Chen was my biological father, and instead of telling me the truth or letting me go, you decided to keep me around as your personal reminder of the one time someone got the better of you. For the first time in my life, I saw my father look genuinely shaken. The mask of control slipped just enough for me to see the man underneath. Smaller than I'd always imagined. More frightened. More human. That's not... How did you... It doesn't matter how I found out. What matters is that I know, and now I understand why nothing I ever did was good enough. It wasn't about me failing to meet your standards. It was about you making sure I never could. He straightened up, trying to reassemble his armor of authority. Thomas Chen was a weak man who couldn't handle real competition. He ran away from this industry because he couldn't match what I built. Thomas Chen was my father, I said, and saying those words out loud felt like claiming a birthright I'd never known I had. And from what I've learned about him, he was everything you pretend to be but aren't. He was respected because he earned it, not because he demanded it. He was successful because he lifted other people up, not because he tore them down. And he would have loved me exactly as I am, without conditions or expectations or impossible standards. He's dead, Dad said, like that somehow negated everything I'd just said. So was the part of me that cared what you thought? I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the door. He didn't move aside, so I had to stop inches away from him, close enough to see the anger and something else, maybe fear in his eyes. If you walk out that door, you're not welcome back, he said. You'll be giving up your inheritance, your place in this family, everything. I'm not giving up anything. I'm finally claiming what's mine.
And what's that?
My life. My identity. My right to be loved without earning it. I stepped around him and walked down the hallway I'd run through as a child, past family photos that had never felt like they included me, past rooms full of expensive things that had never felt like home. Emma was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, tears streaming down her face. Sophie, please don't do this. We can work things out. We can talk to Dad. We can... I set down my suitcase and hugged her tightly. I love you so much and I want you in my life. But I can't stay here anymore. This place, this family, these expectations, they're killing the person I actually am. But what if you regret this? What if you change your mind? Then I'll deal with that. But Emma, for the first time in my life, I'm making a choice that feels right instead of a choice that feels safe. I have to trust that. Will you call me? Will you let me know you're okay? Of course, you're my sister. That doesn't change just because I'm leaving this house. Marcus appeared in the foyer, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Sophie, wait. Maybe there's a way to work this out without you leaving completely. Marcus, do you love me? I asked. The question seemed to catch him off guard. Of course I do. You're my sister. Then be happy for me. Be happy that I'm finally choosing myself over trying to fit into a space I was never meant to occupy. I hugged him too, feeling the stiffness in his shoulders that spoke of years of emotional conditioning that taught him affection was weakness. But he hugged me back, and for just a moment, I felt the brother I'd always wished I could know better. Take care of yourself, he said quietly, and maybe call once in a while. Let us know you're okay. I will. I walked out of that house, carrying one suitcase and 30 years of baggage I was finally ready to put down. David was waiting by his car, and when he saw me coming, he smiled, not the calculated smile I was used to from my family.